Thank you, Minister, and thank you, colleagues, for your contributions here this evening. I do also thank you for your support, and I note there are amendments tabled which we'll go into in more detail as they're moved. Just for Deputy Pringle's knowledge, there's no scheduling of this bill with the release of figures in relation to homeless numbers. That happens in the last week of the month. That will be next week. They'll be published on the Friday, as I have done since I've taken over, and very clear. And I just say to colleagues, Deputy Buckley earlier on came in with talking about the measures that are taking place here. We did debate other residential tenancy protections here in July this year, and I'm grateful that many in the opposition have moved from the position that they had then of opposing that particular bill, which afforded protections for those who needed it most, those whose incomes were affected, jobs have been lost because of COVID, and those protections are in place and are working, and I'm glad of that, because there were people, and I take that there were genuine concerns that members here had, that some were talking about. Deputy Buckley, I remember specifically back in July, talking about a tsunami of evictions that would come into play post the removal of the blanket ban on evictions. That just wasn't sustainable in the manner in which it was set up, and that was the legal advice they had. So we transitioned into something far more secure on primary legislation, which is the Residential Tenancies and Valuation Amendment Act 2020, which came into effect from the 1st of August. And not only did that provide protections into next year, into January 2021, it made some permanent changes, like in relation to the extension of the period for a notice of arrears to 28 days, that notice of arrears has to go to the RTB as well, that the Money Advice and Budgeting Service are involved then at that stage. So we tried to deal with the issue of rental arrears at the very beginning of the problem, before they become a problem. And that is a good thing. And actually less than 2% of tenancies as well, which I think it's important that colleagues are honest with people too. Less than 2% of tenancies ever come into dispute. And that is a good thing also. And Deputy Pringle mentioned the 2004 Act, that many of the Section 4 provisions are within. And that was an act brought in. I saw you kind of making some party political charges there earlier on about Fianna Fáil and this and that and the other. I'd just ask you who brought in the 2004 Act as well. So we have the work that we did earlier in July that was opposed by many in the opposition. I'm glad the opposition, and many are, now supporting this piece of legislation. To answer your question genuinely as well about what happens should, unfortunately, another restriction like a level 5 come in, these provisions will kick back in automatically. And I take the point that has been made by Deputy O'Callaghan earlier on about the length of time given to put amendments forward. The staff have worked incredibly hard within the Bills office and within my own department, and I know you recognise that, and rightly so, as did others, Deputy O'Brien indeed. So hopefully with these measures passing, that we won't have an instance, if we do go down into further restrictions in the future, that these measures kick back in again automatically. So I do take the point. It's never something that I want to do, to be able to have to bring in legislation on an emergency basis like this. We're debating it effectively all stages this evening, and then I go to the Shannon tomorrow with this bill, and we've already sought and received the permission to seek an early signature motion by the President. And there are important measures here. Some have mentioned as well the provisions in relation to Britain and the notice period. There isn't an eviction ban for 6 months in Britain. There isn't in what would term the 4 parts of what one would term the United Kingdom. It relates to England, the 6 months, and it isn't an eviction ban. It's an extension of the notice period. So those who mentioned that earlier on, I think in relation to what Tory governments are doing versus what governments are doing here in the Irish Republic, it's very different than that. And I know, lest we forget, that tenancies of a duration between 1 and 3 years have a 120-day notice period. Over 3 years, a 180-day notice period. So we've already brought in, which from March, which the Oireachtas during the interregnum brought forward with the support, I think, of everyone, was the initial ban, which I extended. And then we brought in the more permanent measures. And this is needed to protect tenants. And I know all of us here, regardless of where we're coming from in this debate, my priority is the protection of tenants. But what we've also got to do is to ensure that those protections that come in don't ensure that there's another exodus from the private rental market of the decent landlords that are there, and many of them are, because most tenancies, as I said, only 2% of tenancies actually fall into the category where they would come into dispute. So others have to recognise the fact that we are losing the mom and pop landlords out of the market. Now, I want to build more public homes, and that's why in the budget that we just passed and this government brought forward, that is the single biggest housing budget in the history of the state, where we will build. And I was in Donegal with Deputy Pringle. I was glad he came and met me there that day as well. We're opening public homes. 5 different housing estates in Donegal were opened that very day. I want more and more of that. So next year we're targeting 12,750 public homes, 9,500 actual builds. And then this year, because of the July stimulus, the largest one, a voids programme, where we're bringing 2,500 existing social homes back into stock, and those 2,500 homes will be allocated and occupied, most occupied, but at the very least allocated by December this year. So that's what's being done. That's actually what's being done. So when we talk about the provision of permanent homes, that's what I want. I want public homes. We're going to bring forward affordability measures, an affordable purchase scheme, as well as affordable rent, which will come to the Dáil as well, which we're working on. So, when we're looking at the provisions that have been given in relation to ramping up our housing supply, we've got to do that. Some have bemoaned the fact, I think you in particular, Deputy Pringle, about the short-term rental assistance measures that have been given. That's not by way of propping up a private market. Let's be very honest about it. There's like 58,000 HAP tenancies supported by my department. What do you want me to do? Not support them? Do you want me to actually stop funding that? So all those families basically don't have homes. Like, so you see, no, this is, well, no. But this is actually, but these are the choices that we have to make. So in the budget, which you opposed as well, we have now made provision for a further 15,000 HAP tenancies, new ones. Now, I don't want to necessarily be doing that, but I have to make provision for it if we're to stop people going into homelessness. So what we're doing instead, though, we transition into public homes. And that's what we're doing. The largest building programme in the history of the state on public homes we will do next year. Okay? So we've supported that. That's what this coalition is bringing forward. That's what I'm bringing forward as Housing Minister. So in the short term, though, whilst we're dealing with the pandemic, one thing I would say as well in relation to delivery of homes, that we've ensured our construction sector will stay going through level 4 and 5. And I commend them and commend all those workers in the sector who have shown an unbelievable degree of flexibility, working under tough conditions as well, but they've endured and they're enduring, and they have shown, and the sector has shown, that it's able to adapt. And obviously the safety of those workers has to be paramount, but I think it's important that we don't fall further behind in relation to our housing delivery, and the sector is staying open with their agreement and with the workers' agreement there too. And the safety measures on the sites that I have visited have been absolutely exceptional. And there are protocols in place should there be any further breakdowns within any of those sites. So we're focused on delivering public homes for our people, affordable homes, both rental and purchase, for our people. And what we are doing is adding further protections for our tenants. And look back at the Act and the bill that I brought here to the Convention Centre at the end of July. That has worked. And it is working. And the Residential Tenancies Board and their numbers will tell you that it's working. Only 177 people I saw up to the last quarter had actually sought those protections. And they sought those protections in the main twofold. Is because, one, there may not have been a need to seek the protections, but secondly, we need to get more information out about it. And that's why this week, and actually what's happening at the moment, is 450,000 circulars are going to tenants and landlords all across this country, advising of the new rights and protections that they have. And I've been engaging personally, that was asked by a number of deputies, I personally engage with Simon Community, with Focus Ireland, with Threshold, tenant advocacies, all the time. And we have formal meetings that we sit down with them in relation to homeless delivery, of how we can strengthen tenancy rights. So I'll ask Ceann Comhairle just to say I very much welcome, and I do genuinely welcome, the support that members opposite have shown towards this piece of legislation. it will be effective. It will also mean that should there be further restrictions, which we all hope there won't have to be, that these measures then will come back in. And it adds to the protections that we brought in August earlier of this year. There are amendments, I think there's 13 or 14 amendments that we'll deal with at committee stage, and I'll deal with each of them. And I know that they've been put down, and I will take them obviously in the manner in which they have been put forward, which is a genuine desire to be, for members to put forward their views on how they see this piece of legislation may be improved. And I will listen to the arguments that are made at that stage. It has been mentioned, and I do, Alaskan and Quarter, before I conclude, Deputy O'Callaghan mentioned the more vulnerable in particular and communities within our society, and reference our traveller community and the new Irish community. I'm acutely aware of that. I won't go into detail here, and you'll understand the particular reasons why. I am engaged, as is Minister Peter Burke, directly with organisations, particularly in relation to traveller accommodation and what further measures we need to do to help the traveller community through the COVID crisis. And we provided additional funding in that regard, and significant. And I've actually, just last week, I've had a number of phone conversations with representative groups. So I take the point that you've made. I take it very seriously. We've got to ensure that those who are more vulnerable to this virus are protected. And then our homeless services. And that's why our homeless services, Alaskan and Corla, that in the budget this year, that we're going to put €218 million in 2021 into homeless services, to addressing homelessness, to expanding Housing First, which I think most deputies, regardless of what side of the House they come from, will see it as a very worthwhile and effective mechanism to help those who are most vulnerable in our homeless community with addiction and mental health issues, and to provide the wraparound services and support that are there. Now, I, as Housing Minister in this government, are committed to expanding Housing First, and we will do that. And we have secured the funding to do that, and right now, actually, we're carrying out an evaluation and looking at the targets for different parts of this country where we can expand Housing First into, and we're going to do that, because my absolute priority is reducing the numbers of families and individuals in homelessness in every city and town across this country, in every county of the 26 counties of this republic, and we will continue to do that. And I'm acutely aware, right down to a county level, of the challenges that our local authorities have there. But we won't be found wanting with regard to the funding that we provide and the assistance that we provide in that regard. That's another reason why I put out the call for housing in July this year, was to, on an exceptional basis, to ask our local authorities to source single properties. One for larger families, 50 larger families who have been homeless for over 4 years now. And 73% of our homeless community, our adult community, are actually singles, and we don't have enough property for single people. So that deals with design into the future of how we're going to design our estates, but right now we need to deal with that issue. So the funding this year in the budget, 218 million, up from 168 million in 2020 this year, and that is significant and gives us a fighting fund, and a fighting fund to fight homelessness. But first and foremost, what we need to continue to do as a government and as a Dáil, and I respect all members here, is to work together on behalf of our citizens to make sure they're safe during this pandemic. That is the purpose of the legislation that I've brought here this evening, and it balances the rights of those who own property, and we have to acknowledge that right. Some people may not, agree that should be the case, that you can set aside constitutional rights. I respect Bunreacht na Héireann. I think all of us as legislators should, and I'm assuming all do, but you can't just pick and choose out of it. It's not, it's not a pick and mix. This is the Constitution. You have to abide by it. So the laws that we make here have to abide by Bunreacht na Héireann. So this bill here has been very well crafted with the assistance of the Attorney General and the Office of the Attorney General, and the staff in particular in my own Department of Housing, Planning, or Housing, Local Government and Heritage. And I want to thank the team there for the work that they have done, late into the night, at bringing forward a very robust piece of legislation that will add to the armoury that we have, that will add to the protection that we have for our for tenants here in this country. I'll conclude just by saying this, Alaskan Corla. I'm acutely aware of the responsibility that I have to try to keep people, and particularly tenants, and particularly those in the homeless community and other communities, safe during this pandemic. And we're going to do everything we can to do that. And when I stood here in July, I told colleagues if we needed to do more, by way of the protections we bring. I will come back into the House with further legislation and do that. And that's what I'm doing here this evening, with the support of my colleagues in the Green Party and in Fine Gael here in government. So if we need to do more as this pandemic moves on, and hopefully we will see the back of it soon, we all earnestly hope that that be the case, I will come back in to the Dáil and Shannon again and further strengthen protection should they need to be. It needs to be proportionate. And that's what I will do. And I thank colleagues for their contributions this evening. I've listened, I've taken notes. I look forward to committee and remaining stages where we can debate the amendments that have been put down by members here.